The dense forest was alive, pulsing with the rhythm of nature. Trees stood like ancient sentinels, their branches entwined in a canopy that filtered the sunlight into soft rays of green. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth, and the ground beneath was soft, coated in layers of moss and fallen leaves. It was a sanctuary, a remote place far from human hands, where the wild creatures could roam undisturbed. It had been years since she had come here, but the forest had always called to her. The forest was her home now, a place where she could disappear into the shadows, where the world outside couldn't touch her. Her name was Mira, a cat with glossy black fur like the night itself, and eyes that gleamed with an intensity few dared to approach. She was an outcast among humans, a creature with a heart that held secrets deeper than most could understand. Mira had found peace here, among the towering trees and babbling brooks. She moved like a shadow, silent and unseen, slipping through the underbrush with ease. The sanctuary was her kingdom, and she was its queen. There was no room for anything more in her life. The outside world had once been her domain, but it had taken too much. The memories of human voices, the scent of their food, the quiet loneliness that had accompanied their love, these were things she no longer needed. Yet there was something in the forest she had never expected. Something that stirred her curiosity and unease in equal measure. It started with the sounds, faint at first, barely noticeable. A rustle in the leaves, the snap of twigs breaking underfoot, the faintest shuffle. There were no other cats in the sanctuary, only the wild things that belong to this world, foxes, deer, squirrels, but no other cat. It was rare to find one, and Mira never thought to look. Still, something tugged at her, drawing her attention to the movement in the woods. One day, as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows through the forest, Mira heard it again. The faintest sound of paws padding through the underbrush. It was different this time, more distinct. She froze, her muscles coiled in silent readiness. Her heart thudded in her chest. There was something about the sound that made her skin prickle. It wasn't the soft, hesitant steps of a deer or the carefree scurrying of a squirrel. This was deliberate, purposeful. It had the weight of something that knew its place in the world. She stayed still, blending into the dark, her amber eyes scanning the forest. The breeze shifted, carrying with it the scent of another, a scent that made her fur stand on end. A cat, but not like any cat she had ever known. This one was different. It scent sharp and wild like the very forest itself. It was a presence she couldn't shake. It haunted the edges of her awareness, pulling her deeper into the shadows, into the forest's embrace. Days passed, and the presence grew stronger. Mira began to sense the other cat more often, always just out of reach. She caught glimpses of it between the trees, a flash of fur, a tail flicking in the distance. But whenever she tried to approach, it vanished into the dense foliage, leaving her with only the faint trace of its presence. It was maddening. There was something about this cat, an unspoken connection that Mira couldn't understand. It was as though they were tethered, their fates intertwined by some invisible force. The forest had always been her sanctuary, but now it was a place of tension, a battleground between two forces, both animal and instinct. Every time Mira ventured deeper into the woods, the unknown cat seemed to follow her. Never too close, but always near. Its movements were measured, careful. A predator, but not one that hunted with malice. No, this was a cat who understood the forest in ways Mira could never comprehend. One afternoon, as the sun hung low in the sky, casting an eerie orange glow over the forest floor, Mira found herself once again walking through the familiar trails. She could feel it now, the presence of the other cat, closer than ever before. Her heart raced as she moved silently through the underbrush, her eyes scanning the trees. The rustling sound came again, unmistakable this time. The cat was near. Mira padded forward, her body low to the ground, her muscles tense. She was determined to see this creature, to finally confront the unknown. But as she pushed through the dense thicket, she saw something that made her stop in her tracks. There, sitting on a rock in a small clearing, was the cat. Its fur was not black like hers, but a striking silver gray, shimmering in the dappled sunlight. Its eyes, Mira's breath caught in her throat, were the same amber as hers. The cat turned its head slowly, locking eyes with her. There was no fear, no aggression, only an unspoken understanding. Mira's breath caught in her throat, her pulse quickening. She had expected to feel anger or perhaps confusion, but instead, she felt a strange sense of recognition. This was no ordinary cat. This was something else, something older and wiser than anything Mira had encountered in her years wandering the sanctuary. The cat didn't move. It simply stared at her, its gaze unwavering. Then, the unthinkable happened. The other cat rose from its perch and took a step forward. Mira stood frozen, her body stiff with tension. But the cat didn't advance with the intent of a predator. It moved with grace, with purpose, and stopped only a few feet away. It tilted its head slightly, as if studying her. Mira's heart pounded in her chest, her mind racing. Was this a challenge? Was this the end of her reign over the sanctuary? But as the other cat lowered its head slightly, Mira felt an unexpected warmth flood through her. It was not a threat, but a silent invitation, an offering of something she had long forgotten: connection. The moment stretched on, endless and filled with unspoken meaning. Mira felt a stirring deep within her chest, a recognition of something ancient. The wildcat had been there all along, moving in the shadows, waiting for her to see it, waiting for her to understand. They were not enemies, but two halves of the same whole. The realization hit her like a wave, crashing over her in a rush of emotion. She wasn't alone in the sanctuary anymore. There was something here, something that understood her. The forest had never been a place of solitude. It had always been a place of belonging. And then, just as quickly as the moment had arrived, it was gone. The silver-gray cat turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving Mira alone in the clearing. But something had changed. The air felt different, heavier, more alive. Mira stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where the other cat had been. Her heart still raced, her body tingling with the remnants of the encounter. She was no longer the queen of this place. She was simply one part of a much larger world, one that extended beyond her understanding. As night fell and the sounds of the forest came alive around her, Mira curled up beneath the branches of an ancient oak, her body warm with the memory of the encounter. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the need to retreat into the shadows. She had seen the cat, and it had seen her. In the silence of the forest, Mira finally understood the truth. There was no such thing as solitude in the wild, not when the forest itself could speak to you through the presence of another. The sanctuary was not just a place for escape. It was a place where connection and love, unspoken and silent, could bloom. And with that understanding, Mira closed her eyes and let herself fall into a peaceful, contented sleep. The night passed quietly, but the sense of change lingered. Mira woke with the first light of dawn, the golden rays of the sun filtering through the trees and casting long shadows across the forest floor. The air was fresh with the scent of dew on moss and the promise of a new day. She stood slowly, stretching her lithe body as her amber eyes swept across the sanctuary. It felt different now, as if the very forest itself had shifted overnight. The usual calls of birds, the scampering of squirrels, the distant rustle of the leaves, everything seemed more vivid, more attuned to the subtle rhythms of the world. As Mira padded through the woods, a feeling of calm settled over her, a sense of unity that she had never experienced before. The usual tension that had once clung to her every step was gone, replaced by an unspoken knowing that something had changed within her, within the sanctuary. It was a shift in the air, the earth, the very pulse of life around her. She had not seen the silver-gray cat since their encounter, but its presence lingered like a shadow at the edge of her mind. At times, she swore she could feel it nearby, watching her from a distance, a silent companion. Other times, the forest seemed to hold its breath, as though waiting for her next move. But Mira no longer felt the need to chase or search. She simply moved through the woods, the forest embracing her as one of its own. Days passed, and with each one, the connection between Mira and the wild sanctuary deepened. She could feel the creatures around her, not as intruders in her territory, but as fellow travelers in this untamed world. The forest seemed to open itself up to her, revealing paths she had never noticed before, hidden streams and quiet groves where the light danced through the canopy like a whispered secret. Yet, despite the serenity that had settled into Mira's life, there was still something that unsettled her. A subtle, growing unease that tugged at the back of her mind. It was the silence. The stillness that had once been comforting now felt oppressive, like the calm before a storm. The presence of the other cat, once a comforting thought, had grown into something more haunting. Mira had begun to feel it, the subtle pull, the increasing weight of something unresolved between them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the forest was bathed in twilight, Mira found herself standing at the edge of a clearing she had never ventured into before. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth and pine. She hesitated, her ears twitching at the soft rustle of leaves around her. The clearing was bathed in the last remnants of daylight, casting long shadows across the tall grass. And then she saw it. The silver-gray cat. It was sitting on a rock at the center of the clearing, motionless, its eyes locked onto hers, those amber depths filled with something ancient. Something ancient. Mira's heart quickened as she stepped closer. She was drawn to it, her body moving on instinct, as though the forest itself were guiding her. But there was a shift now, a change in the air, and it filled her with a sense of foreboding. The silver-gray cat didn't move. It sat there, watching her with a calmness that only deepened her unease. Mira approached cautiously, her tail flicking with an uneasy energy, but she couldn't help the pull she felt towards it. It was as if the cat's gaze was unraveling something deep within her, pulling at something she had long buried. She stopped just a few paces away, staring at the cat. But this time the usual connection wasn't there. Instead, a coldness settled in her chest. Something was wrong. The cat's eyes seemed to glimmer with a sharpness, an edge that hadn't been there before. Its presence now felt more like an intrusion than a companion. Suddenly, there was a sound. A low growl, barely audible at first but unmistakable. Mira's fur stood on end as her eyes snapped toward the edge of the clearing. From the shadows, another figure emerged, a large, imposing form, a creature she had never seen before. The figure was dark, its body sleek and powerful, its movements fluid and predatory. It was not a cat, not like Mira or the silver-gray one. It was something else entirely. A creature born from the forest's depths. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dimming light, and its gaze flicked toward Mira with a quiet but undeniable menace. The silver-gray cat's eyes flickered between Mira and the creature in the clearing, a strange glint of recognition in them. Mira's heart pounded in her chest as the weight of the moment settled over her. This wasn't a simple encounter. This was something ancient. Something that had been waiting, watching, and now it was unfolding before her. The creator stepped forward, its presence commanding and unyielding. Mira's instincts screamed at her to flee, to run far from this place, but her body was rooted to the spot. She couldn't move. Her gaze flickered back to the silver-gray cat, but it remained still, unmoving, its eyes fixed on the approaching creature. And then, in one fluid motion, the creature lunged. The clearing erupted into chaos, a flurry of movement and sound. Mira felt a surge of adrenaline, but it was too late. The creature's form crashed into the silver-gray cat with the force of a thunderclap. A primal scream tore through the air as the two beings collided, their claws and fangs flashing in the dim light. Mira felt her heart skip a beat as she watched the struggle unfold before her. But even as the fight raged, something strange happened. The silver-gray cat's eyes, once sharp with purpose, softened. It wasn't fighting to kill, it was fighting to protect something Mira couldn't yet understand. The creature's growls filled the clearing, but the silver-gray cat didn't retreat. It stood its ground, a force of nature in its own right. Mira stood frozen, unable to look away. The realization hit her with the force of a lightning strike. This was no ordinary animal encounter. This was a battle for the forest itself. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, the fight stopped. The creature, bloodied and exhausted, staggered back into the shadows, disappearing into the night. The silver-gray cat, now bruised and battered, remained standing, its gaze never leaving the place where the creature had vanished. Mira felt the weight of the moment settle over her like a fog. There were no words, no explanations, only the knowing that whatever the forest had been waiting for, whatever bond had existed between her and the silver-gray cat, had been fulfilled. And now, the sanctuary was theirs, shared between two souls who understood the wild world in ways no others could. Mira stood still, the tension in her muscles finally releasing. Her heart still raced, but there was a peace in the air now, an understanding. The silver-gray cat looked back at her once more, and for the first time since their encounter, Mira saw it for what it truly was. Not a rival, but a companion in this world, a partner in a fight older than time itself. And as the night closed in around her, Mira turned and walked deeper into the forest, knowing that the sanctuary was hers, theirs, and that no matter what came next, they would face it together. The days following the battle felt different, as if the very air of the sanctuary had been altered, imbued with a new sense of purpose. The forest, once a place of silent observation, now hummed with energy, as though it had witnessed something monumental, something that could never be undone. Mira moved through it with a new awareness, her every step more deliberate, more attuned to the rhythm of life around her. But there was still the lingering question: what was the creature? And why had it come? The encounter, though terrifying, had felt like a prelude to something greater, something that had only just begun to unfold. Mira often found herself returning to the clearing where the battle had taken place, her senses sharpened by the events of that night. The ground was still marked with signs of the struggle, the earth disturbed, the scent of blood lingering in the cool air. But the silver-gray cat was never far from her thoughts. She felt its presence in the quiet moments, when the wind whispered through the trees, or when the forest fell into a hush. It was out there, somewhere, watching over her. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky and the shadows lengthened, Mira ventured further than she had before, deeper into the forest's heart. There was a pull, an invisible thread leading her, guiding her towards something unknown. The trees grew thicker here, their trunks twisted and gnarled, the canopy above so dense that only slivers of light broke through. She passed an old weathered stone marker half hidden by moss and vines. It was strange, this forgotten landmark, but it didn't seem unfamiliar. It felt like it had been waiting for her. Mira paused, her ears twitching at a faint sound in the distance. It was low at first, like the faint rustling of leaves in the wind, but then it became clearer, more distinct. It was the sound of movement. Soft, purposeful. The air grew still, as if the forest itself held its breath. Then, from between the trees, emerged the silver-gray cat. It was no longer the same tranquil creature that Mira had first encountered. There was something different about it now, something powerful that radiated from its every movement. The cat's eyes were no longer just watchful, they were filled with an ancient wisdom, as though they had seen the very soul of the forest. Mira stood motionless, her gaze locked with the silver-gray cat's. The bond between them had deepened in the weeks that had passed, a connection that transcended understanding. The cat stepped forward, its body moving with a fluid grace, and Mira instinctively followed. It led her deeper into the heart of the forest, past the forgotten stone marker and through a thicket of trees.